Well, my parents came to England, London, England. I think it was 1950. It was 2 years before I was born, anyway. They was, I suppose, what you call one of the first two lots of um, Windrush people that came over from Jamaica. There were lots of job opportunities over here, and things were pretty bad in Jamaica. So they were obviously looking for better opportunities for work, etc. With the certainly with my mother, I don't know about my father, but certainly with the intention of actually going back once they had achieved a certain level of, income and security. Anyway, my mum was getting on to 80 when she first started to exhibit signs of dementia. And I think about it now and I laugh with my sister about it. She had always been a fairly exceptional person, let's put it that way, quite a strong character. And she had her own way of dealing with things, and we as children used to either get terribly embarrassed or just ignore her. But so when she started exhibiting, when she got older, strange behaviours, we actually took that as normal, and we didn't really think much of it until things began to get quite difficult. She became very suspicious of not just outside people, but us as well. And I think it really came to an issue when she wouldn't let us into the house because she thought that we were stealing from her. And it was things like, things that we wouldn't even think of. There were things that were treasured by her, but not by us. Things like, intricate crocheted tablecloths we'd never touch in a month of Sundays, but they were important to her. She couldn't find them. We had got to a stage, I think, where we said, look, we want you to see somebody. She refused. So there's nothing wrong. She thought it was a ruse of us to try and get in the house, all this sort of stuff. Eventually, it was actually my elder sister that managed to convince her. And actually, I think it was because she had some problems with her eyesight. That's right. So she managed to take her to a hospital on a day centre, but she had warned the GP that this is what her concern was. And it was actually well organised in a way, because they actually arranged for somebody who was good at assessing issues where connected with elderly and possible onset. And so that happened on the same day that she came for her eye test. That's where I think we had a really good relationship with the GP, because very often, I mean, they're so busy these days, they wouldn't have been able to do all that sort of stuff, but they actually managed to coordinate it so that she could be examined. I think the issue around looking at the individual and the cultures or language or whatever the issue is, that's where it's quite important about building a relationship, that they are aware of it, because I actually think if it was dealt with in a straightforward way, we would never have sorted it. I think it was the GP in particular that was quite understanding, I think, with the help of a health visitor who had a Caribbean background and knew how perhaps some of the things could be addressed. Any issue of forgetfulness, memory, strangers coming into your house and asking very personal things, not acceptable at all, especially when you're older and you expect to be treated with a level of respect. So I think the fact that we had the support of somebody who obviously had some sort of inkling of some of the issues that were going on and was very supportive and managed to speak to the doctor around that. So that was very helpful.
Because I remember you saying last time about the doctor needing to address your mum with her full name, and kind of that if you didn't do that, that could actually be quite
Yes.
tricky to repair that relationship.
Yes, exactly. It's something that you, as a child, well, adult, but as a child, you take it for granted, and you don't realize that it has an impact on the relationship that she has with other people. And that is something I think that is in a lot of communities. Actually, it's certainly in African communities, you're called auntie or uncle as a term of respect, even if you're not auntie or uncle. And if you're a visitor, you address somebody by their proper title. So it's a little thing, but it immediately sets the scene, doesn't it, for decent relationships. She'd been over to Jamaica quite a few times, and particularly when my sister was over there, and had bought a piece of land, for it to be built, etc. And this happened as the house was being completed. So it would have been ridiculous, her going over at that stage, because she just clearly wasn't able to look after it herself. And that was always a hankering of Mum. I need to go home. In fact, she's buried in Jamaica now. So it was quite important for her. Yeah, music was a big plus. Mum was always quite musical. She liked, she had a great love of film musicals, things like The Sound of Music. Although it's not, I mean, it's obviously not Jamaican, but it was actually very important to her. And other songs and things that she knew as a child, basically, and that was one of them. And I remember, although she didn't recognise various people, or she was going through situations where she accused me of locking her in because she wanted to get out the front door, she wanted to go out, and I remember her looking at me as if I was the worst in the world, and it was actually yes, it was on this particular musical, and she started singing along to it. She knew all the words. Now that is something I think that's across groups, but with her there were some particular records and songs that were to do with when she was young, and some of the I remember them because she used to sing them to me as well, so that was quite important. Music was important, and also, I mean, obviously, types of food. That was that was a big issue, because she never thought that we cooked enough West Indian stuff when I was a kid anyway. I mean, I'm married to somebody from Northern Ireland, so I tend to do a range of food, and I've never known Mum not to do anything other than West Indian cooking. So it was quite it was quite important when she had care that people knew how to prepare stuff that had a West Indian component to it. And it's actually not all that difficult. Mostly stews, from what I remember. But it's that was actually quite important to her. Yeah. Music, food, and obviously photographs. Or the sort of sepia-coloured photographs that she had of her mother. Yeah, she had a couple of and photos of her. They I think it's the same, I think, in Indian and South Asian families, where you have a studio photograph. You actually have somebody that you go to the studio and they take the photographs, and there's a family, and it's very Victorian if you think about it, because there's a lot of stuff in British customs that I actually see replicated in the West Indian family, except the West Indian customs seem to have gone on and on and on, and the Victorian ones have actually evolved. But picture taking was very important. Yeah, the family, dressing up, looking serious. That was very important, and they were really nice reminders for her when she was older of the, her roots and her family. It's like hair care, skin. People with black skin tend to have drier skin, and every time they bathe, shower, wash, usually, again, it's always difficult to generalize, but certainly in my family and people I know, that there is you always make sure that you moisturize. Now, this is something that I came across as well. Obviously the intention is to make sure that anybody in a care home or who's been treated is kept clean. But the addition of emollient of some sort is essential. If you've got dry skin, cracks easily, obviously gets infections if you're not careful, particularly if you're lying in bed and you've got bed sores and all that sort of stuff. It is absolutely essential. Hair care and skin care are quite different. My mum, she never bothered with the sort of moisturizer you buy. It was olive oil. She used olive oil all the time, and it would have seemed strange perhaps to a helper who isn't used to that she's going to get olive oil in the kitchen to make sure that all the skin is lubricated. That was quite important to mum, and actually it makes sense. I was in Manchester and my sister was abroad by then anyway, so we had to make sure that we could actually have a trusted person that understands all that. So they were quite helpful, because we were talking about where was this, in Southwark in London, so we could actually identify people that had that background or knew something about that background. I think if she'd stayed longer, or if she hadn't deteriorated, we would have brought her up to Manchester, but she refused point blank, even in that state. She didn't want to come to Manchester. It's too cold. That was, it's too cold. Every time she used to come up, it was raining, so she just assumed it's like that all the time, which it probably is. I think it's when she started developing physical complications around her eyes. Then she had issues with her stomach, and she had to have adaptations to her diet anyway because of her stomach, and that proved a bit problematic, because then you had to sort of work through what she could eat, what she couldn't eat, that sort of stuff. She just wouldn't eat. If it was something there that she didn't like, was tasteless, that's her usual thing. What's it? Tastes of nothing. That's right, she used to say. But at the same time, she wasn't somebody that liked it hot, spicy. It was just, I know because I'm the same really, and that's what I've got from her. Something with a bit of flavour. So it was, some of the stuff that she had, it was really bland. Yeah, and that's not a word she used, but she just said, just taste of nothing, and that's what she meant, and I could understand that. So, but if you can't have salt and you can't have spices, and it's very difficult, and you can't have onions, because that's the mummy used to cook with onions all the time virtually. So that was quite difficult. So it was trying to work through with people to try and find what would be attractive. It's probably easier in areas where you've got a certain level of population. And where I live, now I live in South Manchester, but we're very near Moss Side, which has quite a sizable Caribbean population, and they actually have centres for people that can come with their helpers or whatever and have lunch and meet together. And it's really lovely, because it's the same sort of thing with familiar music, pictures, people that come help get singing with them and all that sort of stuff, and Caribbean food. It's amazing how that's actually helped in just getting people to communicate, feel that they're actually listened to, talked to, make them laugh, that sort of stuff. It's quite amazing how that sort of changed over. So it's very difficult if somebody's isolated from their community. But if they're able to go at least once or twice a week somewhere where they got that sort of thing going on, then it makes a whole difference. It really does. It's always about never assume, that there's a standard way of dealing with anything, that there'll always be, because we're human, there'll always be different idiosyncrasies, different things that will work for some and not for others. Yes, I think that the first thing is, don't assume. It's not like it's not like dementia overwhelms the person so much that they're always like it. That you've got to actually be aware when they're being lucid, and when they're not, and don't assume that they're like that all the way through, and then sort of discount what they're saying. That was a lesson for me. And for others as well, I think, in our family. But sometimes the way that the conversation takes place, it's a bit like one of these modern Nordic films where you're going into the past and you don't realize that the thing's gone back into the past. You only know because it's a sepia color, or and I think there's something like that within the illness there, that the condition, that you don't discount them because they've got they have issues around memory or whatever. There will be times when they will be lucid, and you need to get that. You need to make sure that you capture that. And it sounds, but actually holding their hand, physical. My mother was never very demonstrative. I mean, she was a lovely, very loving mother, but it's something that I've learned as well, that sometimes some people just aren't physically expressive in that sense, and Mum was never like that. And I remember the first when I was holding her hand, and she was upset because I wouldn't let her out of the house, and I was holding her hand, and she kept pulling it away. She was so cross with me, and I had to keep persisting to make her realize that I loved her, and I still valued her, and I wasn't trying to make her a prisoner or anything like that, because there will be times when they'll hate you. They will absolutely hate you and look at you with such hatred, and it's it's difficult to sometimes think that could possibly be, but it's their condition, and remember that all the time. So anyway, I think those are the two important things. It's two extremes, really, isn't it?
I think persistence of love is key.
It's gotta be there, yeah.